All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Megan Carey, the Event Marketing Manager and Community Marketing Manager here at NetSurion. Thank you all for joining us for today's webcast. This is going to be how MSPs are delivering better, faster incident response, and we'll be diving into the confusion, the difficulty, and the opportunity involved. In today's presentation, we're going to be led by none other than A.N. Anant, that's NetSurion's Chief Strategy Officer. And we're also going to be joined by our VP of Channel, Marco Albano. So for the agenda, we're going to go through the key components of IR, who owns it, how you guys as the MSP can be the IR hero. We'll also be leaving some time today at the end for a Q&A. So throughout the chat, if you have any questions, please drop those questions in the chat box and we'll be getting to answering those. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Anant to lead us through the journey of IR.
Thank you, Megan. Good day, everybody. Is there much doubt that the networks that we operate and are responsible for are under attack? I don't think so. I mean, especially since the start of the pandemic, the fact that everyone's gone through digital transformation and we're increasingly online, and not just online, but always on, broadband connected to our customers, to our vendors, to our suppliers, for our employees that might be remote. We're always connected, which means the attackers are as well. And so there's not much debate as to whether we're under attack. The question is, what are we going to do about it? So as they say at the Department of Homeland Security, and you hear this announcement all the time at the airport, at the bus stop, at the train station, see something, say something, and don't just say something, do something. Response is the act of actually doing something. Take urgent action, disarm the threat, maybe isolate the endpoint or kill the process, or maybe take out the user permissions, something of that sort. Of course, it doesn't end there. Once you've disarmed the threat, you got to think about whatever happened, why did that happen, and how can we get better. So you're thinking about, when you do response, things like alerting, triaging, and then workflows for either manual or automation, orchestrating systems, and so on. So before you can actually get to response, you actually have detection. If you're familiar with EDR or XDR, the D is the detection, and it comes before the R. You can't catch if you can't see it. So then what might be necessary to have before you can get to response? Well, first of all, wide coverage. I mean, it's no longer the case that your assets are all working at the office and that your data center is on-prem. Instead, your employees could be pretty much anywhere. You're probably using cloud, including software as a service. And so you need to have coverage for your current network. And then having coverage is nice, but you need to be able to detect threats in it. Now, too often there is a desire to place this as a technology problem. In fact, I'll tell you that that's the last thing you should worry about. Right? The first thing you should worry about is the process, alert monitoring, management of feeds telling you what's going on, and then hunting for threats. Once you've understood what your processes can and should be, think about people, because they're the hardest to find, hardest to get, hardest to change, hardest to train, hardest to keep. You need to think about doing this 24/7, people who know what the threatscape really looks like. Also people who've understood what your particular implementation looks like and are familiar with whatever technology is it that you've picked. Oh, by the way, in today's world, you want to detect these threats, you need to have, of course, EDR at the endpoint, but then you also need SIEM solutions. You need to think about anomalies, which is UEBA. You need to be able to get feeds in order to understand what the threats are. And then you need to be able to look at your weaknesses, your deficiencies, your vulnerabilities. So there's a bunch of technology that's involved in detection. You want to merge all these things together? Well, XDR in 2023 is probably the right thing to do. You can converge these into a single platform so that you have all these technologies being available in one place for the people and the process to not only perform the detection, but then orchestrate what we've come here to talk about, and that's the response. So then what sorts of responses are we talking about when we say better, faster incident response? Well, on the one side, you have automatic responses. And guess what? You've had some of these for a very long time. For instance, I'm sure you had a firewall and it was configured appropriately and it probably blocked connections that it was configured to do so. Guess what? That's an automatic kind of a response. The firewall sees it, the firewall blocks it. If you've enabled, for example, two-factor authentication, and your authentication mechanism said, yeah, you have the password, but you didn't type the correct second factor in, and it rejected the logon, that's another example of an automatic response that you probably already have today. And then, of course, you must have some form of endpoint protection, even if it is legacy antivirus. And so if it sees something that matches the signature, it will disallow that process. Again, an automatic kind of response that you've had for a long time. But that's not enough. You also have now the hybrid kind of response, where if you've implemented something like an XDR solution, you're going to get weak signals that by themselves don't rise to the level of blockage. But then when they're correlated by somebody that sees them and sees and can connect the dots, then they are confident that this is actually a problem. Even though each individual atomic signal wasn't really there, the group together, especially in the eyes of an expert, is enough to tell you that this is a problem. And of course, remediation or response, the other way of saying that R word, is typically involving the asset owner. It's difficult for a third party sitting in isolation to do this without involving the asset owner in some fashion. So these are the types of responses when we talk about response. So here's the question that the webinar really asked. Who do you think owns incident response, especially in today's day and age where there's a customer, there's an MSP, there's a service provider, there is a shared responsibility model, there's a cloud service provider. So again, who in this cast of characters owns incident response? Well, in my view, the asset owner has the ultimate ownership. Whoever owns, the component on which the response is occurring, they're the ones that ultimately own it. Now, that's not to say they can't get help. And it's very likely that they will get help if this thing is implemented in the cloud. Why then the cloud service provider might be able to assist you in some fashion. If you have services from an XDR provider like NetSurian, they may be able to assist you. And of course, if you are the MSP acting on behalf of the customer, you would be able to assist them as well. But in terms of who has ownership, the asset owner does. This is not very different or new, frankly. You can see this in, for example, your personal health. Who's responsible for your own personal health? The answer is you are, yourself, for your outcome. Now, can you get help from the medical professional, the doctor, the nurse? Sure you can. Can you get help from your partner or spouse? Absolutely. From your family? Yes, they're ready, willing, and able to help you. But you have responsibility for your own personal health. In the same way, the asset owner has the ultimate ownership for incident response. But this can be a source of confusion, primarily because of what's called the shared responsibility model. Not sure who does what, to whom, where, when, and why. And so it's something to pay attention to. If you have clear expectations and communications, especially between the parties that could be involved, your cloud service provider, your XDR provider, the MSP, the asset owner, if this is documented and collaboration is occurring, then that's a beautiful thing, and you can actually get to effective and timely incident response. But the finger pointing about I thought, you thought, he thought, she thought is all too common, and so that is something to pay attention to. This is especially true because the way in which all of us have migrated so rapidly to the cloud. Now, you're probably already familiar with the shared security model that cloud providers provide. Right? This is not a new thing. It's been going on for 10 or 15 years. And as you get to either software as a service components like Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace or Dropbox or Salesforce, or you get to actually having your data center shifted to the cloud, AWS or Google Cloud Platform or Azure, then there's some confusion around where does the responsibility of the cloud service provider happen? All the stuff that you see there in green. What else is on me, the customer? And off that, what can I offload to either my MSP partner or to the XDR service provider that they're deploying. So whatever can be taken over by the XDR service provider is here in blue. And I'm not going to belabor this because this webinar is not about this model, but is instead about automatic response or remediation, as we call it. But I did want to point out that the waters are greatly muddied when there is a cloud and a third person or a fourth person in the mix, and that's the cloud service provider. By the way, when you think about response, one of the things that you need to bear in mind is response is going to be very different depending upon which component in the stack we're talking about. Not only how you respond, but who can be responsible for these. So if it is a SaaS solution that you have, and examples of SaaS solutions are Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, then obviously the cloud service provider is responsible for things like platform security and for the infrastructure, right? But it's still on you as to who you allowed access to. So user security is going to be on the customer or on the MSP on behalf of the customer. If a provider like NetSuite is involved, then they can maybe take over and be responsible for endpoint security, for reporting at a minimum, for data security, and for containers and cloud workloads. Different answer if you're doing infrastructure as a service, different answer if you're doing platform as a service. But you do need to think about response in all of these buckets rather than just simply club them under one generic R for response. Where does this model, especially with the cloud, and I'm spending some time on cloud here because it's become so prevalent, where does this break, in the real world? What we see primarily is that confusion that we talked about in the opening paragraphs that Megan said, right? There's misunderstanding. There's either the one extreme of customers thinking the cloud is so secure that it's all Microsoft's problem or Google's problem or AWS's problem, and we've got nothing left to do, and that's simply not true. The other extreme position, of course, is people who say, well, the cloud's completely useless. No one's taking any risk. I got to do it myself or it doesn't work. And really, frankly, neither of these is quite accurate. That leads to, in many cases, over-delegation. Just make the assumption that the cloud service provider is responsible and move along. This will break response capabilities in the real world. There's also the problem of capability versus responsibility. The cloud provider might tell you that it's your responsibility, but that might not be in line with your capability. And in fact, in some cases, we've seen cloud service providers insist that this is not their responsibility, when in fact, they're the ones that are best equipped with the people and the skills and the technology and the processes to do something about this. So getting this clear is an important point. Of course, default settings are a curse. Very often, the default settings aren't necessarily what you want, especially when it comes to something simple like two-factor authentication, which you should really turn on. So you want to make sure that the default settings aren't the ones that's breaking security and then causing to have you activate on response. And then, of course, those fuzzy boundaries, because of the misunderstanding, because of the over-delegation, that's where this cloud security model, particularly when it comes to detection and response, can break. And it's something that you need to pay attention to simply because how quickly we're moving to the cloud, especially after the pandemic. The digital transformation is accelerating it. And so understanding it, accepting it, documenting it, living it is an important element of being effective when it comes to response. All right, so then we know now what is response, what comes before response, hint, it's detection. And we know what are the kinds of responses. Let's get to the nuts and bolts. What do you need in order to have effective response? Two things, a plan and a set of playbooks. What's the plan? Well, the plan is the overall document that says who's going to get assembled and then what are you going to do when an incident actually occurs. Now, you have to identify before an incident ever occurs in the plan, for example, who's going to be members of the incident response team. Is it the MSP? Who on the MSP side? Anybody else on the customer side? What about the XDR vendor? Are they part of it? And then are you going to get legal involved if there are disclosure obligations? Are there going to be management that needs to be kept up to date? You want to do this up front because when the incident occurs, you won't have time to do this. So a plan is something that is formulated and kept and agreed to so that people are aware that when an incident occurs, they're going to be on the team. You've also identified now swim lanes. Who does what to whom, where, when, and why. And that's useful because the more clarity you have, the less running around you're going to have when the fire alarm does, in fact, go off. By the way, what should an incident response cover? You know, your tax dollars at work. Did you know that the NIST, this is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, have published a pretty good document? Now, you don't want to live and die by NIST documents all day long because they tend to be onerous, they tend to be generic, they tend to be heavy reading. But this one's a good one. It tells you in relatively simple language, staying agnostic to the kind of industry, kind of technology that you have, what are the 7 phases, you know, from preparation to detection to containment to recovery, and to what must you do after the fact. So if you have time, take a look. You can find this document very easily on any of your favorite search engines. Worth a read, and it can be a useful basis for formulating a plan for yourself. Keep it lightweight, because what's the point of heavyweight stuff? So you've got a plan, and you know in general what you're going to do when an incident happens. But then when an incident happens, you need a playbook. This is a specific series of steps. When that particular class of incident happens, and you have different steps depending on whether you've had a hardware failure, or you've had a denial of service, or you've had a malware, or you've had someone misusing credentials. These are classes of incidents. For each of these classes of incidents, you need to have a playbook that says, preferably in advance, what are you going to do for those 7 steps that the NIST document said? How will you detect it, analyze it, contain it, eradicate it, and then recover from it? You don't want a playbook for everything that can occur, but you want one for every class of incident that you think you might really want to respond to. This kind of document is not a static document. It's a living document. You update this with experience. You update this preferably with your XDR provider, who themselves have experience and come to the table having done this over many years, over many different customers. So you do want to make this a living document. This is also a good thing to have because you really cannot automate anything unless you've actually practiced it manually for a while. There used to be a saying in the old AT&T network, we're talking 1970s, you couldn't automate any process unless it hadn't been in manual operation for at least 6 months. Because then you sort of understood what the process was, you've done it manually, and now it's a candidate for automation. So these playbooks are very helpful as a precursor to automation. As you're going to see, automation is going to be the key to survive the volume, the variety, and the velocity with which you're going to get these sorts of incidents. Here are some example incident classes. I said you want a playbook for each one of these kinds of classes. So malware attack in general, it could be ransomware, it could be some piece of malware that jumped on it from a USB, came to you from attachment, email, whatever it is, it's malware. Denial of service, this is going to occur at some point. Someone's going to try to make sure that you can't even get to your service. IT administrators whose accounts have been compromised, or improper usage, somebody who is an IT administrator perhaps abusing their privileges, unknown applications, or then failures of software or hardware. These are incidents that can occur. And for every one of these classes of incidents, perhaps more, you should think about a specific playbook. In the real world, recognize that incident response is a team job. Teamwork is going to make the dream work. You need to collaborate. Otherwise, you can have a hero who can maybe put his finger in the dike and prevent the dam from exploding, but this is not possible to do on a sustained basis. You want to win 24/7 because the attackers are after you 24/7. You need to think about working 24/7, which means you're leveraging automation as a force multiplier. You're enlisting other people on your team, including perhaps the XDR provider, the customer, and other experts as and when it becomes necessary. So we talk a lot about shared responsibility, but I'd like to take a moment to suggest to you that as an MSP, it's preferable that you think about shared fate. What do I mean? Well, we know that in general, finger pointing is unhelpful, especially if it's going to be three-way finger pointing, the MSP, the cloud service provider, the XDR provider, and perhaps even the customer, now four-way. You see 4 fingers over there. That's unhelpful in any situation, but it's especially stressful and unhelpful when it comes to response because you're in the thick of it. So rather than think about shared responsibility, which is sort of a finger point, that's you, that's me, that's not me. Instead, why not a shared fate model? This was suggested by Phil Venables, the CISO at Google Cloud. And the idea has merit, especially for a service provider like NetSurian that comes to the table and says, this isn't just about technology, guys. We're with you, shoulder to shoulder. When you win, that's when we win. So in other words, work together as a team. It's not just you, but it's also you and the XDR provider. Share more than just dollars. This isn't a one-way. I gave you a contract and that's the end of it and never see you from here on in. Of course, be clear and transparent because that's necessary, as you noted in previous slides, and offer some guardrails. You cannot make someone do what they don't want to do. But you see this all the time, by the way, in the medical arena. The doctor tells you, here are suggestions for your diet, here are suggestions for your lifestyle, and if you did these, why then your health outcomes are going to be good. So you can offer these guardrails. Can you make them do it? No, you can't. That's not your job. That's their mother's job. But you should offer guardrails as a shared fate model, especially when this is centered around the customer needs. Notice how the medical professional centered around the patient needs. Similar fashion, we need to do this around the customer's needs, and different customers have different needs depending on where they are in their security maturity journey. So you need to be able to offer this in a meaningful way. By the way, this is not a dodge, and some customers will see it that way, to say that they can wash their hands of responsibility. That's never going to happen. There's going to be some elements of security that are always the customer's responsibility, and that is something that you need to bear in mind. Now, we talk a lot about the co-managed model, and so the question that I get from time to time is, in a co-managed model, when NetSurian, like an XDR provider, is involved and there's an MSP, tell me again who's responsible for what pieces. Well, you'll establish an incident response capability by engaging us as a partner on behalf of your customer. We come to the table with knowledge of attacker tactics. We will perform the detections. And then if automatic response is configured, we will execute them. But we're also looking at what is it that's been escalated by the technology to tune it, to triage it, gather the incident artifacts, and escalate, saying, here's what needs to happen, because this could not be automated as a response. At this point, it's the MSP responsibility to act upon this guidance. Now, once the incident has been remediated or put to bed, there's yet another step to conduct a root cause analysis, to close the loop, if you like. That can also be, so everything that's in green can be the responsibility of a provider like NetSurian. Everything that's in gray really belongs to the MSP or the end customer. So if you're asking who's got responsibility of what pieces, there you have it. Now, we provide the managed open XDR service, and I wanted to contrast that with incident response. So this table, tells you, by the way, you don't have to be making furious notes. After this webinar is over, these slides will be sent over to you by our team. So you'll have them, for reference. But our responsibility as the XDR provider is to respond systematically, to identify and fill in gaps, to really take 80% of the loads. Anything that's minor, anything that's a breach, anything that's an event, to minimize theft and loss, that's really primarily on us to escalate. However, complying with legal regulatory, the most severe incidents where maybe manual incident response is necessary, you need to be on site with that briefcase, and to recover, perhaps restore from backup, as for instance, in the case of a ransomware attack. These are really capabilities that the IR provider, in other words, the partner, in other words, you, the MSP, are going to be responsible for. Now, I'll hang around for questions, but I'd like to turn the stage over to Marco Albano, who's VP of Channel, who can explain to you what the opportunity is for you as a partner to work with NetSurian in order to deliver this kind of capability to your end customer. Marco?
Thank you, Anand. Appreciate that. Great content as always. First off, thank you everyone for jumping on here today. I know it's almost towards the end of the week and you're looking forward to the weekend, and I know you have busy schedules, so we appreciate you cutting off some time to join us. As Anant mentioned, I'm the VP of Channel here at NetSurian. I recently joined about 6 months ago. And part of what I wanted to do as onboarding is get to know our partners, the ones that we currently work with, and really get involved with my team around the prospects that we're looking after as well from a managed service perspective. And a lot of my conversations have been geared toward managed XDR and its role in improving their incident response services. And the feedback I get to is why they're currently using an XDR platform or looking to use one really comes down to really three driving factors: visibility, cost, and expertise. And as an MSSP or an MSP, as I look to deliver faster and better incident response, all these factors play a key role. And just quickly, like visibility. When you're looking at a vendor and evaluating one, you want to partner with someone that gives you visibility across the landscape. And it's changed over the last few years. Obviously, with COVID and the remote workforce, the types of attacks haven't changed, like phishing and ransomware. These are still leading the charge. But what has changed is the way in which these actors are actually infiltrating organizations. So we're seeing phishing through cloud apps, through Wi-Fi, malware, through cloud and endpoint. So partnering and making sure you're partnering with a vendor who can give you visibility across the board is key in delivering faster IR services. And you want to make sure that vendor obviously keeps up with the landscape as well. The second was really around cost. Obviously, this plays a major role for everyone. And as an MSP and MSSP, as you look at the cost in which it would involve to actually build these services out yourself, these costs add up really, really fast. And it's not only the technology piece of it, but it's the infrastructure, the challenge around building that out, and the time it takes to also build out the processes and having the staff run that 24/7, 365. So making sure you partner with a vendor who provides them a quicker route to market in a more cost-effective way is a great example of how, looking at a service provider like NetSurian can get you to market quicker and be able to, drive down those costs. Lastly, looking at expertise. Obviously, this is a known challenge for everyone. And I think the last stat I heard was about 3.5 million openings in cybersecurity. The good news is over the last couple of years, this is plateaued, but this is still a major challenge for all of us, including us, to deliver services that the customers need. So why MSPs are looking to partner more and more with vendors is to help collaborate and build out their stack and service offerings. Just to recap quickly, in order to achieve sort of better, faster incident response, my conversations with MSPs and MSSPs and service providers have been surrounded by these key factors of visibility, cost, and expertise. But underneath that is the how. How are they able to deliver this? They needed their vendors to be in the boat with them and collaborate, right? It's not a finger pointing game. In order to achieve what your customers are looking for, this has to be a team effort. So we need to have, and again, there's no silver bullet when it comes to security. So partnering with someone that has automated response built into their technology isn't asking you to rip and replace existing investments. And looking at someone you can build out custom playbooks and collaborate with you to build out specific needs around your clients is what you should be looking for in a vendor as well. So now, if you don't mind just moving on to the next slide. Appreciate that. Awesome. So now moving onto the opportunity that you all have and a bit more about what you should be looking for in a partner. Right? We all know the market trends that are impacting the need to deliver these services quicker and more efficiently to your customers. You have the trends of the remote workforce, which we touched upon. The cyber attack landscape is evolving. The shift from trying to build it out yourself to actually partnering with vendors like NetSurian and other providers is something we're seeing. I was at MSSP Alert Live earlier this fall, and the majority of the conversations that were happening with MSPs and MSSPs is who can I partner with to drive the services that I need more cost effective and efficiently to our customers. And obviously, with the cybersecurity market, with the 3.5 million, this doesn't help you, right? There's not enough people out there that you can hire that has the expertise to build this out yourself. But what should you look for in a partner? right? You need them to be flexible. So, and that means understanding the needs could be different across your customers, right? Every MSP's customers are all different. And you work with a wide range of number of customers. So the idea of co-management is a topic that I've actually heard a lot over the last 6 months. You have to have, you're working with companies that have security teams, if you're looking at that higher end market, but you're also working with IT staff that is one person, is two people, right? And that's where you come into play in augmenting those services. You need to be able to partner with someone that has a multi-tenant infrastructure, but also allows the visibility to that customer if they so choose to be in that sort of co-management approach, right? And obviously another one, right? Prior investments. You guys have invested into your stack, and you need to make sure that the security partner you choose aren't asking you to rip and replace what you've already invested in, right? That's the idea of the managed open XDR. And that's a key factor and something I've had a lot of conversations with over the last 6 months, right? The MSPs and MSSPs that I've spoken to, as like yourselves, they already have a stack that they've invested in. And the benefit of working with a company that is an open platform is you can keep those investments, and we can just wrap around that and collect all those logs from your stack that you have today. Another one, which I'm sure you guys are aware of, is the pricing, right? Vendor also has to have flexible pricing models. You all have a way you go to market and price out your services. Chances are it's a per seat or per month, whether it's 12, 24, or 36-month contracts. You need to find a partner who can work with you and help you drive up your margins where they need to be. And at NetSurian, just a quick plug. I'm trying not to talk too much about our services, but more on the industry. We're recognizing this, and we're investing in building out a new program and pricing model to meet your needs, to meet the business needs that you have as you grow, you scale, you gain more margin. Again, scalability. This is a big piece, right? As you grow, in addition to the pricing, we're looking to incentivize our partners to grow as well. And as you scale, you want to partner with someone that makes sure that throughout that growth process, they're able to support you, not only on the support side. Here at NetSurian, we provide a technical account manager to each and every one of our partners, leading point person for anything on the technology side, not only on the support, but the services, right? We're scaling out. We've been in the business for a long time. We have the expertise. We have the pre-built programs and everything that we could hear to help support you. Then on profitability, the idea of looking at a vendor, right, and adding more services. If you look at the kill chain, you have predict, prevent on the left, and you have detect and respond on the right. A key opportunity for you here is that you're able to add on with the managed XDR service. This will allow you to offer more services to your current customers and also turn it more profitable. You'll be able to gain higher margins and offer more services to not only your current base, but also new existing and customer acquisitions. In turn, by offering these services, right, your total addressable market becomes larger. You could offer more services, as I mentioned before, to your existing base, and will help you. And you want to partner with someone that has the programs and campaigns to help you go to market and gain those new customers. Just a quick example, I was on a call with one of our partners earlier this week. They had a new client, right, that all of these factors played into it. They had a compliance needs too around NIST, and this specific client had an existing platform in place, and they weren't seeing the actual value out of it. It was limited visibility across the network. They didn't have the expertise on staff to keep up the scale, and they were having a tough time building out their processes around IR. So as a result, the customer is looking for an MSSP to deliver these services to them along with the IR piece. And this is just a perfect example of how, your customers' needs are there. They're coming to individuals like yourself in the MSSP space, and just adds a significant value because now you're able to offer not only the managed XDR portion of it, but also tag on the IR services and do this quicker and more efficient. That's all I had on my end for today. I hope you all found this helpful and worth your time. I want to thank you again for joining, and I believe we're going to turn it over to Megan for a quick Q&A session.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ananth and Marco. That was really insightful. Like Marco said, we're going to now move into some questions. We do have some that have come in. Again, if you'd like to submit a question, please enter them into the chat box so then we can get to as many as possible. We'll run for a few minutes here. Let me start with Marco. You touched on this one a little bit, but maybe you can expand on it a little bit more. And there's a few parts to the question. So it says, how are incident response engagements typically priced by an MSP? You know, is it by hour or by incident? Is it an annual fee or simply, you know, a use it or lose it?
Yeah, what I've seen with talking to our partners is they'll do an hourly fee on incident response. That's the most common one that I've seen. But I've also seen some of our partners more in the niche space where they'll put together like a retainer. So there's a block of money that they can draw from throughout the year. And if it isn't used, they can roll that over into the next year. So two options, usually per hour, or they build in a retainer that they can draw from throughout the year.
Perfect. And kind of going off of that, somebody asked, what is NetSurian's partner program model and like the high level pricing structure? Yeah,
great question. So right now we have a partnered program for the MSPs and the MSSPs. We also have a reseller program. As I mentioned before, just quickly, we're looking at rolling out a new program itself, but also pricing model where basically the more you sell, the better your price you get. That way your profitability as you continue to grow grows as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Now I'll hand it off to Ananth. This question says, what roles do automation and SOAR play in response? And what are the pros and cons to that?
Thank you. So automation is in everyone's future. By the way, if you aren't clear on this, attackers are using automation pretty regularly. That's the only way they can identify, weak endpoints that are exploitable, vulnerable endpoints. So the bad guys are using automation left and right. Automation can be your friend. It can really be the force multiplier when it comes to incident response. SOAR, or SOAR, Security Orchestration Automated Response, is a collection of technologies that are intended to do this across your infrastructure landscape. So automation is certainly something that you should be looking into. By the way, if you've engaged an XDR provider, then a question to ask them is, to what extent have they included automation in their response? And it's not the universal answer to every kind of problem, but it's definitely there and definitely increasing as time goes by.
Thanks for that. And we have a few more questions, but again, if anybody has any more based off of questions that we've already answered, if you have anything you'd like us to expand on, again, just put that in the chat. But let's move now from automation to AI. So this one I think is really interesting and relevant. Ananth, what role do you see for AI bots like ChatGPT? We know that's all the rage. What do you see is their role in incident response in the future?
ChatGPT from OpenAI is relatively new, and it's still in preview, so it's difficult to do anything in production with it. But it clearly knows a lot, and it's your friend in terms of lookup. And so one obvious thing that ChatGPT can do in incident response is to explain. See, not everything is obvious at the beginning. You have the known knowns where there's no dispute, and you need to do something about it. It's clearly a problem. There are the known unknowns. I mean, you don't know that it can occur, but if it does occur and it comes up to your attention, you know it's a problem. But then there's the hardest of all, which are the unknown unknowns. You're not even sure that it's occurring. You're not even sure what it looks like. Well, ChatGPT is very good at explaining stuff. So that is something that you can use it for at the moment. It's also very good at giving you some suggestions, technical suggestions. For example, write me a script that does the following thing. So if you have very specific questions, ChatGPT and things of that sort can help you. Over time, we do expect that they will become the analyst's friend and be able to take over some of the work, especially the routine, well understood, frequently asked questions kind of work that are inevitably part of incident response.
Perfect. Curious to get your take on this one, Ananth. Let me kind of break it down a little bit. So, an incident occurred and you remediate it, but now you want forensics to identify things like patient zero, what exactly happened, and so on. Is this considered part of IR? And as far as closing the loop, what are the typical steps post-incident?
Yes, it is part of IR. In fact, it's often called DFIR, Digital Forensics and Incident Response. There's an entire webinar and a session run by the SANS Institute specifically for this. So it's definitely part and parcel of incident response. I mean, remember, if you see something, don't just say something, do something. But then having done something to mitigate the threat, can we please go back and see why did this occur? What lessons can we learn from it? How can we plug and improve our defenses? Because continuous improvement is, in fact, one of the objectives. And so it's very much a part of incident response and something that you and your provider should pay attention to.
Perfect. And it looks like we have time for one more question here. I'll pass this to Ananth. Marco, you might have some insights on this one as well. And then it says, a problem with XDR service providers is that they escalate incidents with, security speak. Many self-serve platforms assume that the customer is security literate, but most MSPs also speak, in IT. How does NetSurian address this gap?
Yeah, thank you. This is a problem of providing actionable intelligence. See, when we say, if you see something, say something, what language do you speak when you say something? It's important to speak the language that is the basis for the responder, the person who's going to do something, to be able to understand. So if that person is in IT, which is typically the case, why then they understand IT kinds of things, right? So if you said a USB has been plugged into workstation 3 and the user is John and malware has jumped onto the endpoint and is communicating to a foreign country, that is something that IT understands what it means and what specifically has to be done. But if instead you say, oh, there's lateral movement going on and MITRE ATT&CK T1048 is in play, well, you might sound very knowledgeable about these kinds of things, but specifically, what does it mean? So delivering actionable intelligence ought to be one of the objectives of any service that you engage, which means they understand who you are and what your level of comfort and expertise is, and are able to bring that information, that actionable information to you in that language.
Perfect. Well, it looks like we're out of time today. I thank everyone for joining. Thank you to Ananth and Marco. We'll see you guys next time. This is the first episode of our Partnering for Cybersecurity Success. We'll have new episodes coming out in the next couple months. Again, if you have any questions we went over, or maybe we didn't get to your question today, please feel free to connect with us anytime at info@netsurian.com, or reach out to your channel account manager, or directly to Ananth or Marco. We're all here to help. We hope this talk was very insightful, and we hope you guys have a great rest of your day.